like change. I never have. I've been around for quite some time now, so you would think that I would have gotten used to it by now, but no. I'm the kind of person who's still going to watch the movie they've seen 10 times on the plane before trying a new release. Why? Because I might be disappointed. And at least with Forrest Gump, I always know what I'm going to get. In this sense, I'm like all of us. From a big change to our career to a tiny change to our coffee order, we don't meet change with enthusiasm. We usually meet it with resistance. And the reason for this is very simple. It's a default of the brain. Whenever we meet a new thing, a disruption, a challenge, our need to adapt means we're going to have to get uncomfortable and break a pattern or a habit. And the truth is, most of us would much rather stay comfortable than grow. In this talk, I want to address a very specific kind of change. It's called the midlife crisis. And to be fair, it's a really big one. Most of us meet this particular change when it comes with an extra degree of resistance, which is why in 1965, when psychoanalyst Eldad Jacques coined the phrase midlife crisis, he put the word crisis right there in the title. But my aim isn't to exacerbate it as a huge problem. It's to do quite the opposite. It's to help us anticipate it, understand it through a new framework, and hopefully go way better. In essence, this is my attempt of selling you a new movie and hope that you check it out. Are you with me? Yes or yes? Good. So, at the very least, we can anticipate when this change is going to occur. For the vast majority of us, according to most researchers, this is between the ages of 40 and 55. This is around the time when we're going to start waking up to the fact that we're not the youngest people in the room anymore. And in my experience, none of us are going to like it. Here's a tiny little story about how I woke up to this alarming fact. I was going to see my doctor for my annual physical checkup. I had seen her since my late 20s, and she always congratulated me in that nice way that you congratulate small children about how good my numbers were. My blood tests were always A-OK, my blood pressure was always normal, and my weight didn't fluctuate over more than a decade. And I was very proud of this. And then I stepped on the scale to realize that I had somehow gained over 10 pounds since my checkup the year before. This was surprising. First, because I just told you my weight did not change for more than a decade. And second, because I hadn't changed anything. I hadn't changed my diet. I hadn't changed my exercise routine. I mean, sure, I noticed that my clothes were a little different, but what are the chances, right? So she noticed that I was surprised, and she kindly offered me a second scale. Okay, I demanded a second scale. And once the second scale proved that, in fact, this was not a personal affront, but real number, I asked her, why is this happening? And the doctor said, everything just slows down on the 4th floor. What a nice way of telling me that this is happening because I'm getting older. I went home and I Googled it, and I found that, in fact, the Mayo Clinic and many other medical journals have found that, yes, midlife weight gain is common in women. But I still didn't want to accept that the change applied to me. So I did what any of you would do. I denied it, and I insisted that I would lose the weight in absolutely no time. 5 years in, this hasn't been the case. And though for me, the midlife crisis began with noticing physical changes, for others, it arises around sudden feelings of stagnation and overwhelm in their career. For others yet, it begins when the kids leave the house for college, and you start wondering, what am I going to do now? No matter where it starts, it's real, and it deserves way more than a snarky eye roll. For many people, the midlife era is a time of strife. And the reason for this is, as Carl Jung described it, the midlife crisis is a spiritual crisis. It's an emotional crisis of identity. At the onset of aging, we are essentially confronting a dead end for the way we've seen ourselves thus far. And that's not even the big problem. The biggest problem is that by the time we start noticing the changes, the train has already left the stations. So even though our instinct is to go down kicking and screaming, ultimately, resistance, like my weight loss crusade, is going to be futile. You know, the truth is, I was looking for a solution and some solace, and the first thing I did was I turned to research. But that made things way worse. Hundreds of books and articles I have found cast this as the gloomiest period in life, a time not just of reckoning, but of regret. And then, of course, you all know the midlife cliches, the guy who buys a motorcycle, the excessive plastic surgery, the people who have affairs. None of these sat well with me as I started going through my midlife crisis around the age of 40. And I wanted something better. I wanted a framework, and I wanted something that ended well, and I wanted it for myself and for all my friends who are stuck here in the middle with me right now. So I started to search and search for an answer, for a model. And one day, I found it. I found it the way I find most groundbreaking psychological models that change my life. I found it while watching a rerun of Frasier. In an episode called The Good Grief, Frasier, a radio psychiatrist, has lost his prestigious job. At first, he denies that it's happening, and he tells everyone who will listen that phone's going to call any second now, and he'll be back at work. And in the meantime, he throws himself into comically huge projects. He's writing an opera. He's plotting to take over the internet. He's perfecting his signature dish, duck à l'orange. Observing this, his brother, Niles, who is also a psychiatrist, calls it by saying that what Frasier is demonstrating is actually the first stage of grief, denial. Niles explains that many people are like Frasier. They're deeply identified with their role or with their job. And when that job is gone, they mourn it as if it were an actual death. Niles then explains that the only way Frasier can get to the other side will be to get out of denial and to allow himself to cycle through all 5 emotional stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Throughout the episode, we see him do exactly that. And by the end of the episode, Frasier emerges renewed and ready for what is to come. The message in that episode was crystal clear. If old Frasier doesn't let his self metaphorically die, there will be no new Frasier. And that's how it clicked for me. What we're going through, what me and all my friends, all midlifers are going through, isn't what Carl Jung and Elliot Jaques posit, which is that we're essentially starting to freak out at the first glimpse of our own mortality. Midlife is not about the fear of death. Midlife is a death. And if it's a death, then our way through it, that ends well, is grief, the framework of grief. I could use it, and I think a lot of us could use it, because by the time we get here, we're completely blindsided. We experience strife, and we don't know where it's coming from. And I think it's, among other things, because there's no book out there called What to Expect When You're Expecting to Get Old. And it's not like the emotional and physical challenges that we're experiencing in midlife or something we discuss openly at dinner parties, right? When was the last time you all heard the word perimenopause at a dinner party? Exactly. So what we're all trying to do here is adopt a framework that might actually help us through this transition. And that's essentially what this has done for me. By 2025, 2 billion of us are going to be here, smack in the middle of life. And so I'd like to suggest that if you're one of us, use the framework of grief to help you cycle through, to give you guideposts along your way for this transition. At the very least, it can help you anticipate the roller coaster so that when the roller coaster comes, it doesn't derail you. And if you're not going through the midlife crisis, but you are going through one of life's big pivots, divorce, a career change, use the tent poles of the grief framework to help you identify where you are emotionally and to help you cycle through your transformation as well. You know, me, I've already cycled through all 5 stages, I think. Maybe there'll be a next wave. And it wasn't easy. It's like a huge rumble with yourself. But years later, what you find on the other side, I can tell you, is greater than anything you experienced before. It is a freedom on a new level. And in fact, it's so powerful that I have come to stop calling it a midlife crisis, and I've started calling it a midlife awakening. I believe that one of my heroes for this is another character I discovered through television, Julia Child. In her 40s, Julia Child, who had just lost her first career as a civil servant due to personal circumstances, began asking the question, what am I going to do with my life? The answer came. At first, the answer was to eat, and then to cook. She enrolled in the Cordon Bleu, and in her 40s became such a solid cook that by 49, she co-authored and published her first book, Mastering the Art of French Cooking. At 51, Julia Child got her first television show, The French Chef. She remained a television personality who changed the way we cook and eat for 42 more years until her death at 91. And she did this by initially saying yes to change. Just yes to change. Yes isn't our default. It's not our natural inclination to go, hey, change, what's up? And sometimes change at first can feel like breaking. But I believe that saying no and resisting can possibly mean you avoid the biggest breakthrough of your life. And if you do say yes and follow Julia Child's example, I also happen to know that you're going to end up really liking the new movie. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.